Welcome everybody to episode number 1 of the Leader Studio. My name is Mihir Karkare. I am a co-founder at Mirum India, and this Leader Studio episode is brought to you by Salesforce and Mirum. I'm really thrilled to be here. We have a great panel discussion lined up today. What we are going to do is I'm going to run a 5-minute introduction around Mirum and Salesforce, post which we'll jump headlong into the panel. I'm very excited with the panelists we have today. And then I will move on to an audience Q&A. So that's going to be the structure of today's session. So Mirum is a global digital agency. We are part of the WPP group, which is the world's largest communication services company. We have 360-degree digital solutions that we offer to 80+ Indian and global brands. We do work ranging from marketing automation, digital content, strategy, technology services, social listening, media planning and buying, as well as data analytics. That's the capabilities we have. Next slide, please. Salesforce, as everybody knows, is one of the leading technology companies in the world. And the Salesforce platform provides a 360-degree view of the customer that drives seamless interactions across sales, service, marketing, commerce, and beyond. The Salesforce customer success platform helps organizations engage and inspire their customers throughout their entire journey. Next slide. Specifically, when it comes to education and student engagement lifecycle, Salesforce can help educational institutes across the spectrum from acquiring students, onboarding them, fulfilling and engaging them, as well as retaining them through smarter marketing, streamlined sales, frictionless onboarding, managing instructor operations, providing engaging student apps, as well as personalized marketing for retention, all the while making use of rich personalized experiences as well as data and AI. And this is something Salesforce has done across the world with several leading educational companies. Next slide. As you can see, these are some of the leading education companies across the world which Salesforce counts as their customers. And not just globally, even in India, Salesforce has a strong list of customers, Salesforce and Mirum together, in the education and Edtech space. These are some of the clients that you're seeing here. That being said, without any further ado, I want to jump headlong into episode 1 of the Leader Studio. Next slide. I want to begin firstly by introducing our panelists today. Can I have the panelists slide on the screen, please? Like I said, I'm absolutely thrilled to have such a great panel today for the first episode of Leader Studio. These are experts from the field of education and who bring such a diverse background to the table. We have Professor Venkatraman, who's Associate Dean at BITS Pilani. We have Mr. Vikas Gupta, who's Managing Director at Wiley India. We have Mr. Ninad Karpe, who's the ex-CEO and MD at Edtech and currently a partner at 100x.vc. We have Mr. Vineet Chatwal, who's the CEO of Centurion University of Technology and Management. Mr. Robin Sharma, who's Head of Customer Success and Monetization at Careers 360. And we have Mr. Yashdeep Vaishnav, who's Country Manager for Salesforce's Salesforce Marketing Cloud Suite. And I'm Mihir Karkare. I'm a moderator for today's panel. So without further ado, I'm going to jump straight into the panel discussion. I'm going to, can we, Tejas, can we remove the slide now? And I'll stop sharing my webcam. We'll have all our panelists there. Great. So thank you, everybody, for being here with us today. I'm sure everybody's excited to hear from you. Great, I can see Yash. I'm sure everybody's excited to hear from all the panelists. I want to begin with a question for Mr. Ninad Karpe. Sir, as a VC, you must have seen and evaluated dozens of EdTech startups. In fact, 100x.vc also has some in its own portfolio like Nourish. Can you speak to how these EdTech startups will complement and work together with established educational institutes?
Thank you, Mihir. Firstly, congratulations to Mirum and Salesforce for organizing this event. I'm delighted to be part of this galaxy of speakers or part of this panel. and I think it's a great initiative. Yes, at 100x, we see a lot of startups, and EdTech is an industry now. Particularly, I am seeing one EdTech startup presentation on an average every day, if not every 2 days. So a lot of companies want to get into this space. Having said that, I fundamentally believe that India is the largest market in terms of depth and breadth for any EdTech industry. It has got everything in terms of breadth, and it's got everything in terms of depth. Private sector players, public sector, test prep market, you name it, it is there. So if anyone wants to start an EdTech, startup, India is really a laboratory. India is really a space to do anything and everything. So to your specific response to your question, Mihir, I'll be short and straight in this. Today EdTech can do anything. It can complement, it can supplement, formal education. And in fact, now because of the current COVID crisis and thereafter, it can really, really become something which will add on and embellish the current education system. So be it from K-12 to higher education to skill development, everywhere technology plays a key role. Unfortunately, it's true that education sector has been rather slow to adapt to technology because it need not have adapted. The technology was mostly at the periphery of all educational institutions. Now it has gone to the core, right at the center, not by choice but by force. But the good thing is, I find that the sector is embracing it totally, maybe by force, but it's embracing. Because of that, now the scope for EdTech is everywhere. You get into any sector of education, EdTech can play a very critical role. And combine it with the fact that if you have put artificial intelligence and ML on top of all of this, it can give deep insights to educationists.
Very interesting. I think that's a great perspective that EdTech can play this kind of role. I actually want to get Mr. Vineet Chatwal's perspective on the same questions. I would love your thoughts as the CEO of a renowned university. How do you see your institute working with upcoming tech startups in this brave new world of sorts?
Can you hear me?
Yes, can hear you.
Hello? Yeah. So I think for us, the context was a little different because Centurion, being a skill university, has always focused on just two things. One is employability, and second is an entrepreneur. So these are the only two products that sort of come out of our university, and we always had that orientation. So there was a bit of a rethink that we started doing in August itself on what role will digital play, because one thing that we realized is that across our campuses, we ended up creating siloed organizations which were a little suboptimal. So this so-called hybrid model that is being discussed now, where you get a limited number of students on campus, you rotate and so on and so forth, and rest sort of consume digital content. While these pandemic discussions, etc., are going on, we actually started thinking of this as a transformative student experience per se, right at the start. So even when we looked at our labs and when we analyzed the amount of time that a student actually spends doing practice in the lab or a practical in the lab is not more than 40 to 45%. 60 odd percent, they're just either simulating theory or something that can be easily done online. So our intent, even at that point of time, was that digital, whether it's AI, ML, or whether there is various other types of technologies, have to be central. And for us, this was not a pandemic play. Obviously, nobody saw it coming in August, but it was more about how optimal do we get and how do we offer a transformative student experience as we sort of progress them towards our objective of employability and entrepreneurship, is how we were looking at it. What the challenge wasn't technology, and challenge wasn't that I didn't have enough platforms, etc. For example, Coursera has been embedded, in our curriculum for a very long time, in that sort of a sense. My bigger challenge essentially was, a lot of people start, especially faculty, surprisingly, start considering these platforms, A, as a threat, and B, when they start to create their own digital experiences, they try to replicate the classroom experience on a screen, which never works. You gotta kind of take it as a greenfield approach and sort of come at it very, very differently. Hence, the way the content is done, the way the students are, sort of engaged, etc., has to be thought of very, very differently and has to be seen as enabling a very different student experience from what it is. So that's where I completely agree, that these things are going to supplement or augment, what these are, and we are even contemplating, looking at an Edtech platform of our own, which will be sort of this thing. And being a skill university, our big challenge now is how do we digitize skills? The university side has been relatively easier, but specifically on our skill courses, that's where we are really exploring augmented reality and virtual reality solutions. For example, to conduct 60 to 65% of the exposure on a specific machine, even like a grinder or a lathe or 5-axis CNC, etc. Leveraging these technologies, and then subsequently looking at how do we sort of then bring in the remaining 40% that has to be experiential, with the machine, so to speak. So it's still early days for us, but I definitely see that wherever there are Edtech platforms available which will supplant us, we'll embrace them straight away. Wherever we don't find, especially on the digital skill side, skill courses, is where we are looking at actually creating our own. So that's where we are.
That's very interesting. It's something for all the edtech startups to note, that if you don't fulfill a need in the industry, the industry will kind of find a solution. So it's a very good point, sir. I want to actually go to Mr. Vikas Gupta. We are talking about this brave new world, so to speak. Sir, this availability of technology talent and good communications helped India dominate IT services as a space for so many decades. Do you think COVID-19 making distance and remote learning a reality, do you think we can dominate education space as well for the decades to come?
See, we will be one of the biggest consumers for education, yes. To say that we can dominate the global education teaching space or learning space, it's a far-fetched reality. There are two specific challenges in that. See, we live in a country where, by definition, education is not for profit. So if something is not for profit, it does not create a lot of entrepreneurial mindset. Yes, many people still do. And you find ways to beat the system to build up a solution for a college or for a school. It is not mainstream. That's one challenge. The second challenge is, whatever in the world we say, education is very specific. I'll not even say country specific, it is state specific globally. So when you talk about that something can be solved, we create once and use globally, in sciences, in research, in those areas, yes. But school education, really difficult. It has to change even every few hundred miles, I'll say. But having said that, the ability for us to build solutions which work in any circumstances, and it is not dependent on that you have the best of infrastructure or best of anything, allows us to be dominating parts of the world where maybe a solution created out of US may not work. So that way, I'll say we will still dominate big parts because of the language thing. We are an English language country. But to say that can we dominate education delivery, it will be in technology in many cases, yes, but not in other cases. And honestly, if you say one way, all our professors who go to US or Europe, majority of them are of Indian origin. So yes, if you say Indians teaching, yes, but an Indian company teaching from India, it's a bit difficult. Many things have been tried, like tutoring and things like that, but that is replacing a human because the cost arbitrage. Technology arbitrage, with till the time it becomes commercial for consumption in India, it will be very difficult to say that we can be global in that.
Okay, got it. That's a very interesting perspective, sir. And I want to take that thread again of kind of crystal ball gazing and looking into the future. Back to Mr. Ninad Karpe. I understand sir has to leave in a few minutes, so I want to make sure that I get his point of view on
4:30.
this. Yeah, sir. In a recent Business World column, you had mentioned
So
that
before that,
2025. Yes,
before that, Vikas is a very good
yes.
friend, so I never disagree with him. But I must give a slightly different point of view. He's a very dear friend, so I don't want to publicly disagree with him. On private, I can.
No, you should.
Uh, I just think this is an opportunity like Y2K for the Indian education industry to first become a source of global talent and then get into the next stage. What Vikas said, I agree with him, but I think it's a Y2K opportunity for education sector. And Y2K started in a very innocuous manner of fundamentally, you may call it labor arbitrage, whatever you may call it, but I would like to say, use of good Indian talent for the global education industry, and then get to the next level of, technology and pedagogy. So I have a slight different view from Vikas. I never disagree with. So yes, go ahead, Meir.
I,
With,
I actually
but
would tend
we are
to,
nowhere, sorry,
sorry,
but we are nowhere close to anyone realizing this opportunity. Yes, Vinit, you can. I'm done.
I would agree with Ninad and what he says. I think what is happening currently, for capex heavy universities, I expect a lot of these, would find it very difficult, sort of to, carry on with, especially if you're leveraged in the current day and age, uh, with admissions and wherever, and that's a global phenomenon. So my sense is this will create space for newer models. This will definitely create space for newer leaders to emerge, in that space. And again, irrespective of what you're looking at, content will still be king. In terms of what is actually being delivered, how is it being delivered, those things will still matter. The core of education, what differentiates a education institution from the other, in terms of the content, the faculty, all those things still remain relevant. Uh, but it just has to be the delivery approach has to be completely different. If you are thinking digital, irrespective of pandemic or otherwise. So some
Okay.
of the models, of student teacher ratio and those kind of things, I think are all open for, as for the at the risk of sounding cliche, education was one of these industries that are waiting to be disrupted. It's been traditionally going on a certain way, for so long. Capex heavy, IP light, all that kind of stuff, very limited innovation, and yet you sort of year on year kind of going on, delivering the same thing the same way. I don't think that's going to work anymore.
Sure.
Great.
Yes, Meir.
I'm so Yeah, great to hear all these perspectives, and yeah, which is why I called it crystal ball gazing, because it is a little bit of looking into the future. So, sir, Mr. Karpe, you had mentioned in one of your columns that 2025 seems to have arrived early in 2020 itself, maybe because of the forcing function of this COVID-19. And this actually connects back to what Mr. Chatwal was saying. Uh, is this my question to you, Mr. Karpe, is this really like a secular trend for education overall? Because let's say something like skill development, which may require a physical presence, surely that has been delayed a bit, or it's been pushed back a bit. What is your opinion on this?
So I really do believe that 2025 has arrived 5 years ahead of time because of this crisis in terms of opportunity. Because of that, now everyone is working at home. We are all sitting at home and doing this webinar. From education sector perspective, 96% globally of kids even today are at home. So learning from home is a new paradigm at this point of time. Uh, is the trend secular? Obviously, in some areas, physical touch is required. As Vinith mentioned about their university trying AR and VR, that can take you to a really, really close point. And as technology advances, that proximity to going, not requiring a physical presence or physical touch and feel will become higher and higher to a point that we will soon reach that it's really not required except for one final shot. So I really feel it's a great time for education sector to reinvent because we have really jumped 5 years ahead of time.
Great. Great. So
So, Mihir,
actually,
can I,
on
if you don't mind, if you have any follow-up questions or 4:30 I had to leave, unfortunately.
right. So actually, there are some questions in the audience questions that
Okay,
have come
good.
to you, but I will. So what I wanted to know was, this is audience questions were for later, but I'll just ask you this. This is a question which very impassioned question. Online education is attracting a 18% GST. Do you think that is fair? Is it really a luxury to attract 18%
No,
GST?
I have from day one, I have said this is wrong. You're taxing the future today. Why are you doing it? Why are you taxing this sector? It's a social sector, and this is exactly. It's like health today. The reason globally we are facing this crisis most in our country is we have ignored public health. We cannot ignore education and tax it. It's a wrong thing to tax it. It's really wrong. So me, when I log out, just remember all my tough questions. You can pass it on to Vikas. He's very good at answering my tough questions, whichever are addressed to me.
But I'll just add to the GST. So we have a
Yes,
government who wants everything online. So printed books have no GST. E-book has GST.
Oh, really? Oh,
oh wow.
wow.
So you can imagine, we talk about digital India, and we are the only country in the world where physical books have no GST and e-books have GST.
No logic.
Wow.
No logic.
And you know
Anyway,
why? Because some smart bureaucrat classified e-books as databases.
oh, okay.
Oh wow. That's funny.
So let's not go
Great.
into that.
Great. Right. Great. Thank you, sir. I actually, my next question is to Professor Venkatraman.
So,
And
sorry,
this,
I'll take
yes,
leave, Mihir. Sorry, panelists. I had mentioned I had some other webinar at 4:30. Lovely to see you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you, viewers.
thank you so
Thank you,
much.
Mirum, for
Thank you, sir.
inviting me.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Salesforce. Thank you. Thank you.
Nice meeting.
Thank you. Professor Venkatraman, my follow-up question to you, is that similar to skill development, I was seeing something that you've mentioned about the importance of experiential learning, and especially in technology education. Now, in a world where things are becoming remote, how do students still get the benefit of experiential learning? That's something I'd like you to address.
Okay, if you actually see the laboratory equipment, which are the traditional labs of any engineering college, a technology university, all those equipment have actually become computer controlled. So it is actually a peripheral which controls the equipment, right? So there is a lot of research that is going on. What is that makes the difference between a person standing in the laboratory operating a computer to operate an equipment from a person who is sitting several kilometers away operating a computer which operates an equipment? So they have actually coined this term called the remote labs. How is that remote lab different from the traditional physical lab? Both of them have the physical equipment and both of them are controlled by a computer. But in one system, he is standing in front of the computer and the equipment in a closed room, whereas the other one he is sitting away from the physical system, but the computer is with him. So is it just that the connectivity between the computer and the system or the physical equipment, that distance is the one that is making the difference, is the question that many researchers have asked, and it has not been very well defined. Okay, so what they have called a remote lab is something where the distance from the computer to the equipment is what is going to define the remote lab. So that, having said that, it is technically doesn't matter whether you are standing in front of this computer which is connected to an equipment, physical equipment, or another computer which is connected to the physical equipment, by a distance through an internet kind of protocol. And there is a lot of research that has gone through in identifying what is the effectiveness of the learning outcome, achievement of the learning outcomes using the remote labs and the physical labs. And univocally, all of them have mentioned that this is actually there is a the achievement of the outcome through a remote lab is superior to a physical system, and this has an ontological and an epistemological basis for it. For example, the world that we see around is the constructed world by our brain, and the virtual reality of it is again a constructed world of that physical system. So in the cognitive neuroscience, it has been found that the constructed reality, we attach a higher reality to a constructed equipment than a physical equipment, because a constructed equipment is more perfect than a physical equipment. So people try to engage with the constructed reality than a physical reality, is what the cognitive neuroscience studies and cognitive learning theories are coming up to say. So that, having said that, the remote lab is one definite possibility for all the technology-based education. We in BITS Pilani have created equipment. We have created the remote lab equipment for a very advanced level engineering technology learning. Something like you have the fluid mechanics and machines, then you have the electrical equipment, you have the industrial IoT equipment, you have the automotive equipment, and things like that. And our automotive lab is pretty complex, in the sense like it is quite sophisticated, and all of them are remotely enabled, which means that they are all IoT enabled. So they come with a kind of a connectivity and a console which can be accessed by anybody across the globe. What we do is that, I mean, the possibilities are that when you actually have a physical equipment, when a set of students come into the laboratory and have a look at the equipment and then try to operate the computer, where the vantage points from where they actually look at the equipment, you place the cameras, and then you have make that physical the computer make available to the students who are working from any location. So this kind of a setup actually makes the physical lab available to the people anywhere in the world. And there are many other advantages. Like, one is that the utilization of the equipment improves substantially, because the same equipment can be utilized by the set of students in the university and outside as well. And you have the safety related issues are also addressed, because they are separated from the equipment. And all these equipment have more or less become completely autonomous, in the sense like nobody need to actually go and control anything for the students to access it. When I say autonomous, that is what I mean. So you don't need a physical presence of a person to adjust anything, but most of them can be controlled by the students who are sitting from any location. So with considering all these things, it is becoming possible for us to provide almost all the equipment that we have in a typical traditional laboratory to the students through a remote access control. And apart from this, as you go into a higher level of learning, that is in the higher degrees and things like that, you have the virtual laboratory that is available, where you can model almost any physical system into a virtual system, and that can be controlled, and the results are so much comparable to the actual performance, because this is how the industries operate. The laboratories that I'm talking about are all provided to the working professionals who are from very many locations. So they are themselves using only the virtual models before they can translate, they can implement something in the physical workspace. So this actually becomes quite natural for them. So the remote lab and the virtual labs are the two important developments that has happened in the recent past. Thanks to the IoT enabled equipment, we can actually offer the experiential learning to the students from anywhere in the world, and it is not very expensive. Okay, it is not that expensive that if you have to automate something that it's going to be tremendous, it is going to be costing so much. No, it is actually not, because the physical equipment themselves are controlled by the computer. So all that you need is a physical equipment with a computer, and you don't need someone to adjust anything. As long as you can take care of that, I think you can actually translate that into a remote labor.
Amazing. I think this concept of
But
remote lab. Yes,
just
Ankur.
adding to one point, like as
Yes.
one of our panelists mentioned, that added to this, suppose you can have an augmented reality as a layer over this. So what actually they get to see is, like, they see the physical equipment from a remote location, and they also see the various parameters, what is the pressure, what is the temperature, and things like that displayed in their screen. So it becomes pretty much like a physical laboratory that they will be operating. Only thing is that they will not be seeing their other students who are surrounding them. So that is the only difference. And the research has found that it is not necessary that they have to be into an environment like this in order to learn something new. So that's
Got it. This is very interesting. I mean, for all the representatives from educational institutes learning this concept of remote and virtual labs, I think it's a great insight. I want to move slightly to a different topic when I'm talking to Robin. And Robin actually works with so many different institutes in his role at Careers 360. What I want to understand, Robin, is that in this, how have things like enrollment cycles and so on changed with the impact of COVID-19? And could you also tell us how does this impact institutes which say have a significant, say, outstation population and so on and so forth? If you could shed some light on that, that would be interesting.
So thanks, Mir. I think it's a very interesting scenario that we are, facing right now, considering higher educations in India, and it's fairly more complex than being an opportunity which was just around the corner, and we just we're looking at seizing it early. Uh, this whole pandemic situation has thrown things in a kind of a conundrum. I'll quote facts actually. So, the JEE main exams, which some 10 lakh students take every year, are scheduled in the beginning of April each year. Now, this year, they've been pushed back to the end of July. So, you're basically looking at a 3.5 month kind of a train cycles. Now, how does it impact the overall education scenario? Will the JEE mains take place? JEE advanced cannot take place. No other institutions, I'm talking about the top private sector universities, will be able to conduct any of their entrance exams. And basically looking at students who would have known what to pursue, how to pursue, which universities to consider, just sitting at home and biding their time, waiting and figuring out how things will happen. Now, the 3.5 months might not seem like much, but it becomes a bigger problem when you also consider the fact that the board exams were delayed because of, again, COVID-19 situation. So it's not only the engineering scenario, basically everything in education. Most universities were able to complete their admissions by the 15th of August, as per the UGC mandate. Now, all of this is has been thrown out of the window. And that's one side of it. The bigger problems which institutions are facing is if their marketing expenditures, their enrollment expenditures, according to these cycles. Most of them actually had deadlines in the beginning of April, mid-April, end April. By the time the students are clear about where they're going, whether they are not going to an IIT or not, whether they are going to get into a Delhi university or not, so on and so forth. Now, this means institutions having to invest more to maybe get the same enrollments, and whether they will get the same enrollments or not is actually also pretty questionable. And that is where this, the second part of your question comes in, wherein you talk about migration, as I would call it. That is, a student from a Delhi moving to a Mumbai or a Chennai or a Hyderabad to pursue their higher studies. Now, it's pretty dicey this year how this migration is going to happen, because look at it from the parents' standpoint. Would they want to send their children to a hostel where they know they may be shared accommodation, and the pandemic situation, everybody having witnessed, and the kind of lockdowns we've seen, they not having any control over the situation? There, and this may be a trend, and this is more of a hypothesis. We'll all see how it will work out. But you may tend to choose institutions which are local, or let's say within a 50-mile radius or 100-mile radius, vis-a-vis leaving your hometown and going to a, another institution. This may not happen for IITs, the top-notch institutions, maybe even a bit Spilani, but it's likely to happen and likely to have an impact everywhere else. Now, this is looking at it from the institution side of it. There is not much research on how this has impacted students in India. But very interestingly, I came across a study, and this was a small research which McKinsey conducted amongst US high school students. This was a survey which was done among some 2,500 students, rather small sample set, high school students about to pass out this year and considering options. This was done in the end of April, and McKinsey will be doing it at the end of every month. So the findings from the May end result is yet to come out. Now, in the US, there's already this trend that students have said that 21% are no longer going to their first choice institutions. And the biggest reasons which have come out for this change are the fact that the institution is in the COVID positive area, or they do not want to be away from home, or too far away from home. And the third reason is the cost part of it. So now all of us know that globally we look up to the US higher ed sector when it comes to technology improvements, how things move. They were the first ones to move partly online. They anyways have a hybrid model which has been in place for a very, very long time. Even the feedback from the students and faculty of a hybrid model or a purely online model has, due to as the initial reports I have seen, has not really been very, very promising. Students, I mean, they do not want to pay the same amount of tuition fees studying online what they could actually do in a classroom setting. And this is a fairly important observation. So there are three factors which will eventually impact how higher education in India moves, or anywhere in the world moves, in the next 6 months, or maybe in longer term as well. And that is, one is the ability of students to be able to take up online courses. And the US study actually shows that if you are in the middle income groups, or if you're in the lower income groups, the students are actually seeing this as a deterrent. And there are factors which come in, such as whether am I in a position to study from home online or not, whether my family situation allows that or not, am I able to afford it or not, because it may or may not be considered to be a full-time degree. The second which comes in is the willingness, that is it something I would really want to invest time on when I do not get that physical experience of having a grade situation. And there is a very interesting thing, and the third thing, which talks about readiness, that is whether I have the means for it or not. Now I'm talking about the US market. Now you put these challenges in the Indian context, and I believe they will be multiplied 1,000 times, if not 100 times at least. So the opportunity, well taken. I think at least the Indian higher ed sector is nowhere close to moving online, fully online, anytime soon. The biggest challenges will be seen in enrollments. The biggest challenges will be seen, and then again, all of us know Indian students, especially engineering students or STEM students, as they call it in the US, they also take a gap year, to prepare. I'll prepare for my IIT, or I'll prepare for my NEET, and maybe I'll get a better college. It happens for MBA institutions as well. Now, this has been a trend for many, many years now. You may even see students giving, this year a pass, and maybe actually only taking up options next year, or maybe taking an option or a university nearby and going for a credit transfer next year, when with utmost certainty that the grades are good. Through a credit transfer, you would be able to make it to your dream college. And I think that's more of a perspective, but that's more of a perspective when I look at the student side of it, which is the side which unfortunately we don't get to hear from a lot.
Right. No, that is very interesting. I also want to pursue further what you think could be done about it. But very quickly, I want to move to Yash before that. Yash, I want to talk specifically to you about the fact that, Salesforce works with so many education and edtech customers. Can you talk a little bit about how these customers are using the Salesforce stack to better identify prospects, market to them, and also, especially we keep hearing about this new platform called Evergage, which is part of the Martech stack. What is it that this platform can do? I'd love to hear a little bit about that.
Sure. Thanks, Mir, first of all, and thank you everyone for taking the time out to join this panel. Um, before I get into that, let me give you some stats of what the edtech market in India, because we've been discussing that, right? And I was keen to understand how big is this and why are we, or as in why are technology brands actually investing in something like this? So if you look at the numbers, probably we are less than 10% globally, right? Because the Indian market is at about 9.6 billion. These are numbers of 2018. But the incremental growth in India is at about 40 odd percent compared to anywhere else in the world. While the world is growing at probably about doubling at every 5 years, India will double at 3 years. And you're seeing that. You're seeing, we had, I think, Byju's launched in 2011. Then we had 2012, we had Imbibe. Uh, and our journey also has been pretty similar. We have one edutech startup, we had one education customer, and then we kind of went on. Today, probably there are about 15, 20 customers that we work with. So to come to your question on what we do for as Salesforce, so we've actually got products, or we've kind of productized the entire offering specific to different industries. And if you look at the edtech industry as such, we do everything from an acquisition of an audience to kind of onboarding students. How do you then engage with them, so on and so forth. So to give you a very quick example, in the interest of time, what we do is an acquisition journey at a very high level. How do uh, edutech and education companies onboard, first of all, acquire audiences? Once you've acquired, then how do you then onboard and keep it frictionless? And after which, how do you make sure that you continue to engage with them so that they stick on to you? So this is something that we're doing. I am an ex IBS. One of the conversations that I was having with, again, a batchmate of mine happens to head marketing there now. He's so much in love with the college, so he's now heading marketing there. But one of the conversations that we were having there was, how do we make sure that people come back to IBS? It's not just about a reunion, but how do we make sure that people continue to invest in other courses, right? So those kind of things are what we built and we kind of do as journeys. On your question, what with regard to Evergage, I feel that's the next big thing. A lot of us as marketers talk about personalization and personalization at scale and so on and so forth, which is basically, in simple words, if I'm somebody who is engaging with a brand, as a customer, if I'm engaging with a brand on a preferred channel, which could be, let's say, the standard channels are email or SMS or an app, or I could engage at a social level, then what is my preference? What is the kind of content you should be sending, and thereby at what time you should be sending? So that's the personalization bit. And then people talk about how do you do this for, let's say, millions of customers, which is what I mean by the personalization at scale. What Evergage does is it takes the whole thing to a very different level. So what this does is that it does personalization at scale, but in real time. That's one. And secondly, how do you then make sure that you're offering something which is the next best offer or next best action that a customer is going to take? So these are some of the things we do. We also have customers reaching out to us to understand what can you do on social listening, because students are very, very active on the social platform. So there are brands that want to set up like a command center which talks about what is the sentiment of a particular university, what is the sentiment of of their competition, and that's kind of displayed in that room when there's admissions. But if there's something that's negative, you have a separate crisis management room and you can kind of work on that. So these are some of the things that we do for a lot of customers, again, in India and outside of India.
Great. Thanks, yes. Thanks for that insight. I think that's something that a lot of people would want to deep dive into. I also want to look at the perspective from students. So I want to move to Mr. Gupta. So this is specifically regarding a campaign which Wiley India started recently called the hashtag Take It Like Her Scholarship, to support female students aspiring for careers in engineering and technology. I think this is a bit to make education more inclusive So in these current times, what do you think institutes and other stakeholders need to keep in mind in order to be more inclusive? I think we'd love to get your opinion on that.
So first of all, just to tell Yash, so actually Violet globally is a Salesforce user. So we do about 800 programs with about 87 universities, and everything is on our global model of Salesforce. So a lot of things we do in India, we don't have an Indian license, it's a global license, but we all use Salesforce for customer acquisition and everything you just talked about. So
It's great,
okay,
great to hear that. And you
awesome.
could continue with the global license and we could still help you. So if there's anything I can do for you,
Okay,
let me know.
it's going on. Yeah, we will definitely. So with regards to Take It Like Her, the idea of Take It Like Her was that women in engineering uh, is a so computer science or circuit branches, I'll say to some extent, but mostly computer science did change where more and more girls got into engineering. When we were in college, like you will have like for every 500 boys, maybe 5 or 10 girls in the college at 30 years ago. It changed in the circuit branches, but not in others that much. So the idea is in technology, if we can support more and more uh, girl students and they can, and we support them in terms of giving them skill development courses, all of the things which we teach people to get a job is given to them free. So that we do across India, across colleges, and that is something which gets a lot of positive feedback, gets a lot of good even vibe from the companies when they come and hire, because you are bringing more inclusivity into this. So I think that one thing which technology does as a whole is bringing democratization and inclusivity in education. And I think that is what the extension of Take It Like Her is.
Great. I think that's a great example for everybody to follow. I would urge everybody to look up this program that Wiley India started. I think it's something really, really special. I want to move to Mr. Chatwal. Sir, this is a question as an institute, probably you are very well placed to answer. This is again around this globalization theme that, if we are looking at education being more and more remote, and Professor Venkatraman spoke about some of these things, for students to have physical proximity to the institute at some point in time, this was considered essential. But do we see that changing completely? Will education truly be globalized? And how do you see that impacting students as well as institutes like yourself?
See, for us, it's a, I mean, I agree with the Professor Venkatraman, what he said. So, even in our curriculum, lab, so on and so forth, there was a significant investment that was being made. For example, we have a tie-up with Dassault Systems. So we use their 3DS platform, the entire suite for practically 70 to 80% on simulation, of any and everything that happens, whether that's a wood engineering lab, all the circuit branches, etc., or the automotive design or whatever else we're looking at. So I think that sort of will become the default for everyone. How far you move towards that, depending on your local circumstances, the kind of student that you're trying to target, etc., would change. But I don't think you will have any university running, any technology university, running any of these courses in 100% physical mode. My personal sense, essentially, is that in a lot of ways, whether we've adopted it or not, education is already globalized. When these MOOCs and all these things started, if you look at a lot of the US universities, the top ones like Stanford and even other ones, they've been offering a lot of their content at a very attractive price, if not free, for a very long time. But somehow the adoption wasn't that high, and the completion rates of these courses are also not very high. I personally, for example, was trying to use the lockdown, and at any given point in time, I have 7 and 8 courses running, and I don't know how many will complete over what period of time. So I think that is a challenge, probably where you will see some change. Where the completion rates, etc., of those courses, purely because you don't have the physical option anymore, or to a large extent, would drive you in that direction. So I think even the course review that we did over the past, let's say, when we were trying to see how will we close our semester, how will we conduct our exams, and so on and so forth. One big thing that we started doing essentially was, for example, relook at curriculum, relook at our entire curriculum the way it was. And obviously, that's a process that every university goes through at various intervals. But this year, that whole deep dive was a lot more intense because we realized that we need to go a lot of, what is being called as interdisciplinary in that sense. And what we started realizing was that what we are calling interdisciplinary has already become disciplines on their own. So you're not talking of automotive as you used to talk earlier. Now there's a whole lot of AI, ML, and all those kind of customer experiences that are built in. So my sense is there are elements of that quote unquote globalization, as we call it, that are already there. And earlier when we were discussing, who will be left standing or who will be leaders, so on and so forth, are the people who will sort of make these choices well or not. So this whole bit about students not being on campus 100%, I don't think that's going to happen. You will still have students on campus. How much period of time do they spend on campus doing, and more importantly, what they do when they're on campus is what will drastically change. That
Right.
essentially is how I see it. I mean, my sense would be that, if they were spending, let's say, 220 days, probably that will drop down significantly. And you will have some sort of a rotation, etc., that would sort of go on. We in fact simulated this to see, how many students can we have on campus while we follow all the social distancing norms and so on and so forth. And suddenly you realize, you kind of, if you truly get down to following it to the T, you'll probably lose about 60 to 70% of your capacity, in terms of the way the infrastructure is laid out. So hence you have to, plan it that way and see, how that happens. But the plus side of that essentially is because, let's say I have, let's say, a set of infrastructure that I've already sort of invested in, and there's a college down the road which doesn't have that. Can I now move to a model where, they start using this as well? Can I sort of quote unquote Uberize my facilities, start looking at new revenue streams, is where the game is going to be.
Wow, those are some really great thought starters, sir. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, Professor Venkatraman, would love your views on that as well.
See, I actually like that point that he mentioned, Vineet, what the students will do in the campus is going to change, right? I was talking about the remote labs and the virtual labs. What we try to do in a very sophisticated lab, like an advanced automotive systems lab, which is something like an electric vehicle and a hybrid vehicle, calibration of the engines and things like that. What we try to do is like we try to bring the students to the campus once or twice a month for a period of about 3 to 4 days, and then have a very intensive immersive experience in the laboratory, which will be for, I mean, it will be in smaller batches, like about 15 students will come together and they will spend 2 or 3 days completely in the laboratory, from morning, say 8 o'clock to evening 7 o'clock, and they will be staying in the hostels, and they will get a very immersive experience. And with this kind of a physical experience, they go back and then do their remote labs. They will actually be able to construct the entire virtual ecosystem much better than that. So the engagement significantly improves once they have a look at that facility and then go back and do it. So this is what is going to change actually. When they come into the campus, it is more for their engagement with the university, the learning process, the instructors, and the ambience. And when they go back, they actually be able to relive that experience. You know that in the neuroscience we say, when we actually imagine something, we are not just recollecting the data like the way in which a computer does, but we actually relive that experience in our brain. So the same way, this is what happens. So that is what is going to change in the campus.
I will just take some audience questions for Robin and Yash. I had a lot more questions, as you all know, but I will simply ask some audience questions because yeah, that's very important. So this is a question for you, Robin, and this question is how to ensure, how should parents ensure about the safety of their boards who are planning to go to other cities, and probably, you know, these are the kind of questions that Careers 360 faces often. This is from Mr. Amlan Purkayastha from Chitkara University. I wonder if you would have an opinion on that, Robin.
So maybe it's there is no really one size fits all. It's bound to vary from university to university. And when a parent has to make a choice, I think the best way to figure it out is to take the hard road and make that journey themselves, and see for themselves if that institution is really committed to the safety of students in the student accommodations or not. Practically speaking, it's very difficult to achieve because all institutions have made their capex and their accommodation expenditures and investments, keeping into mind, certain investments, and there's a certain return they expect from it. But I think it would be fair to assume that possibly a three room sharing arrangement may be very difficult right now. They may move to two room sharing arrangements. A 2 room sharing arrangement may move to a 1 room sharing arrangement. Shared baths would need to be sanitized. I mean, there's so many things. I mean, they would really vary from institution to institution. So they cannot be a standardized answer. I think for all universities, it's very important. I mean, this year, in terms of marketing communication, this will be an air in which you need to communicate trust, and your messaging has to be around assurances, and not just about this. I mean, this question comes from Chitkara University. It will not be about Chitkara University or Chandigarh University. The question will be about if I want to take the responsibility of your daughter or your son, and I'm willing to take that responsibility that they will be safe in my campus, then what are the various things I'm willing to do for it? So, like I said, it's bound to vary. I mean, it's impossible to give a unidimensional perspective on how this is going to work out. Then again, I may see it simpler to move from Delhi to Punjab. Then I may see moving from let's say Kolkata to Punjab, and so on and so forth. So it is a challenge, but it's more a function of if we can give that trust and confidence in our communication, and from the parent standpoint, if they can be invited and if they can be persuaded to come and see for themselves, if it's a facility that they would put a ward in for a 3-year period or a 4-year period.
Right. That's very interesting. The second audience question I'll take for Yash. In the meanwhile, Tejas, again, if you're listening, can you unmute Mr. Gupta, please? Yash, one question from the audience for you. Yeah. So this is a specific question which is around how can Salesforce be used for educating, teaching, learning, and the overall educational activities. This is from Mr. Rajesh Mankare, who is a partner at Varad Enterprises.
Okay. So there are various things that we can do, right? I mean, I touched upon some of the 4 key aspects that a lot of education institutes in India are doing, but I'll just rephrase that again. So Salesforce is not just about, while I represent Marketing Cloud at Salesforce, but there is a host of things that Salesforce does. So all the way from, first of all, having that platform of, how do you acquire and onboard all of these audiences, to making sure that you are kind of building that profile across all of these customers, so that anything that you are engaging, the response could be neutral, positive, or negative, right? How do you then not only market to them, but how do you service to these customers? Do you have a platform which can actually... Meera, I'm sorry, but I can hear my own voice. I hope the rest of you can hear me.
Yeah, sounding perfect.
Okay, perfect. So going back, so how do you make sure that this person is able to, as in you are able to build that profile for this student of yours? It could be an app organization. We work with some of the largest, edutech apps as well. Very recently acquired, but you will see a lot of changes coming in, and this is not for a negligible size. It could be for customers or students where there are millions of students trying to learn from the app. There are schools that are posting all of this on an app. There are colleges that are talking to us to say, I'm again hearing my own voice, Mir. Sorry. I hope it's audible to the rest. Okay. So all the way from hosting a class, building that platform, building that app, engaging with those students of yours on the app, and then making sure that you stay engaged with all of these guys. That's something that Salesforce can help you. And there are various these are YouTube videos that are available. I'm not sure if I answered the question in entirety, but there are various things that we do as Salesforce for students, colleges, and edutech organizations.
Probably in episode 2 we need to have some one-on-one conversations. I think that's definitely a must. What one of the things I've realized is with there is so many things to talk about. We probably need to have a longer 2-hour session the next time around with all of you. We are already over time. There are a lot of questions that I had. There are a lot of questions from audiences, but we'll probably find some way to take these questions offline, and continue the conversation even offline. But the discussion today, today's episode, I mean, I think what I will do is I'll move towards conclusion of the episode, and then we can connect again offline and take this forward as an offline discussion. It's been a phenomenal episode. I want to thank each and every one of the panelists, for taking the time out and participating in this particular episode focused on EdTech and education. I'm sure everybody who was in the attendees had a lot to learn from this discussion. As a token of our appreciation, or in college, giving 10 trees in the name of each of our panelists with Grow Trees. Once again, I want to thank everybody, each and every one of our panelists. And with this, we would like to conclude this particular episode, and looking forward to meeting everybody again in Leader Studio episode 2. Thank you again, panelists. Thank you so much.